Hello, everyone. The discussion question of this week is, why is it important for sponsors to meet the residency requirements? I have placed a link for you in the chat. It's pinned. And it is a good video on secondary migration. And if you want to watch that, it's a good explanation and how the second migration works. So we're just going to move on to the module 4 summary. Okay, so this week you learned about who can be a private sponsor. So private sponsorship is a group effort. So unlike family class sponsorships, individuals cannot be expected or solely relied upon to carry out the many tasks involved with settlement. So each person who intends to be a part of a sponsoring group must meet the following eligibility criteria to be a sponsor. So they must be 18 years of age or older. They must have Canadian citizenship or permanent residence or Indian status. They must live in the same community of settlement as the arrived refugee. They must not be ineligible according to the IRPR subsection 156, which means that they do not owe money to their ex-spouse for court-ordered child support or spousal support payments. They must not have committed serious crimes that are punishable by a prison sentence of 10 years or more, such as assault, robbery, and murder. And then also note that after December 18, 2018, DUIs and dangerous driving are considered serious criminality. And they also must not be in a position where their own status is being revoked. So meaning it is not going to be taken away. So the sponsorship undertaking form, which will be discussed further in a later module, includes a declaration which says that to the best of my ability, I will not knowingly or deliberately allow any individual to participate in the group settlement activities who may be considered a threat to the safety and security of the refugees. So sponsors should screen all volunteers using the criteria that we discussed on the previous slide. Those who are assisting in the sponsorship, the sponsors have a moral responsibility to carry out their due diligence, meaning they will do all they can to ensure that the resettled refugees are safe, respected, empowered, and then their basic needs are being met. Who can be a private sponsor? There are 3 types of sponsorship groups that can privately sponsor refugees. First one being the groups of 5. Second being community sponsors. And then there are some who partner with co-sponsors. And then there's also the sponsorship agreement holders. Some of them partner with constituent groups and or co-sponsors. So you also learned about the pre-submission process. Long before filing out the application paperwork, sponsors should work through some critical steps, such as gathering together a team of people who are eligible and committed to sponsor. Together, they should learn all about the type of sponsorship that they will pursue, the program they will sponsor under, and then create a plan which outlines the who, what, where, when, and how the settlement will be carried out. So many of you will be forming a group of 5 or a community sponsor group, or you're perhaps going to be a constituent group of a SAW, or you may be able to partner with one of these groups as a co-sponsor individual or an organization. When forming a group, consider reaching out to people in your local community, hold an information session, and then invite local community groups, friends, neighbors, the local news media, the mayor, or members of parliament. The more people in your community who are involved in supporting the newcomers when they arrive, it will be better for their integration. You can also create a Facebook group or email newsletters to keep people informed of the progress that is being made. And then you want to maintain momentum and retain the interest of people, given that there's a long waiting period until the refugees arrive. So be transparent about the process, meaning explain upfront how long it can take, and that you're looking for people who can commit to helping out at every stage of the process. Okay, and then the second step is to choose program. Now, the program you choose will depend on whether or not you have a refugee selected already or not. So all sponsors can engage in the BVOR sponsorships or LGBTQ plus individuals under the RAP, which is like in partnership with the Rainbow Refugee Society. But only SAWs have the option to sponsor under JAS, which is the Joint Assistance Sponsorship Program. The third step is to create a plan. So it cannot be stressed enough how important the settlement planning stage is. IRCC bases its decision on whether to approve a sponsoring group or not by how detailed and well thought out their settlement plan is. So it can also not be stressed enough that raising funds for the sponsorship is a big task and requires time and focus. So be sure to begin fundraising long before you work on the application. So you can assure the IRCC that in general you already have the funds in place for the sponsorship. You will also learn later in the course all about determining the cost of sponsorship and that the funds cannot come from the refugees themselves. The fourth step is to gather the proof documents. So refugees will need to provide any documentation they can to support their refugee claim and the need for resettlement to Canada. And then sponsors will need to provide proof documentation of their financial capacity. Many sponsors hope to reduce the cost of sponsorship by providing donations of housing, furnishings, and clothing. And if they wish to have those donated items recognized by RCC, sponsors will need to provide paper trail. Receipts and other official documentation should be saved for the duration of the sponsorship and up to 2 years following the completion of the sponsorship. And you also learn about proof documentation required for refugees and sponsors in later modules. When you have all the previous steps underway or completed, then completing the forms can begin. So the PSR application process has two sets of forms. First one for sponsors and the second for refugees. And then there are also two stages of approval. The Resettlement Operations Center in Ottawa, ROCO, approves the sponsors portion of the application, and the Visa Office abroad determines the approval for the refugees portion of the application. For BVOR and JAS sponsorships, the refugees will already have been approved for resettlement, so only the sponsors portion will be assessed by ROCO, and once they are successfully matched with Visa Office referred refugee for these two programs. So every application package should be checked before it is submitted to ROCO to ensure that it is complete and filled out correctly. So simple things can be checked, like has everyone signed and dated their forms properly? Are there any missing forms or documents? Has each sponsor provided their own email address, and is the email address correct? Have you included translations in all supporting documents? So all applications submitted under SAW, though, the SAW agreement, are to be reviewed and verified by the sponsorship agreement holder representative, so prior to submission. And then for groups of fives or community sponsors, you may contact the RSTP trainer in your region to review the forms and documents for completion and correctness before submitting. Okay. So processing of the application begins in Canada. So when private sponsors send their application packages to the Resettlement Operations Center, and which are deemed to be complete by IRCC. And overseas processing begins when the migration office, aka the visa office or the mission responsible, receives the refugees portion of the application for permanent residence from Morocco. And then once a positive decision is made by the visa office overseas, and then from the direction of the migration officer, the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, will begin to arrange for exit visas, flights, and the Canadian Orientation Abroad session for refugees to learn what they can expect as they make the journey and when they arrive in Canada. So once sponsors are confident that they have all the required forms and documents for both the refugees and the sponsors, and that they are completed correctly, and they send their application to Rocco via mail or email. So Rocco will initially check the sponsors' forms for completion, and if there are any documents or forms missing, they get returned. And if everything is complete, they will check if the sponsors qualify to sponsor. They will assess the settlement plan, their financial eligibility and proof documents and police checks, and make a decision on the capacity of the sponsors to fulfill their responsibilities. And if the sponsor undertaking is approved, they will create a file with a G number, notify the sponsors, and send the application to the visa office overseas, responsible for the country of asylum where the refugee is residing. So you should expect to receive an automated reply when application is emailed. And then you should receive an acknowledgement of receipt, whether if you mailed your application or emailed your application within 30 business days. And then you should receive an official approval notification with the G number that the sponsors has been approved and that the refugees portion of the application will be forwarded to the visa office. So when it comes to the overseas processing, once the visa officer receives the application, they will review the refugee portion of the application to determine if they meet eligibility criteria for resettlement in Canada. And if everything is in order, they will typically call the refugee for an interview or send a notice of interview request by email, and in some places, interviews are not even conducted. Sponsors should expect to receive an email notice for when the interview is being scheduled, and if additional documents are being requested from the visa office overseas. This is so you can assist with reaching the refugee to ensure that they do not miss responding to the correspondence from the visa office. If the eligibility screening and the interview goes well, the visa officer will initiate the admissibility screening, which includes the medical check. So refugees will be screened for medical conditions that would put Canadian public or national security at risk. So Ebola, TB, stuff like that. But they are not screened for medical conditions that would place excessive burden on Canadian healthcare services. They're only checking to see if the medical condition will put Canadian public at risk or national security at risk. And there's also the criminal check. So in order to ensure that they don't have any criminal background, what they're screening for is to see whether the refugees have any conviction for criminal offenses that have equivalent offense in Canada. So the refugees are only being screened for criminal offenses that have equivalent offenses in Canada. So for example, some countries criminalize same-sex activities, but it's not a crime in Canada. And then there's also a security check. So part of the security check is to ensure that the refugees have not engaged in any armed conflict, or been a member of a terrorist group or an organization, been a member of a group that has engaged in subversive activities, not committed any war crimes, crimes against humanity, terrorist acts, or genocides. And if the admissibility screening goes well, they will approve the sponsorship and then arrange for loans, visas, and travel documents. So the IOM works with the visa office and the refugees to obtain all the necessary exit visas and travel documents and flight arrangements. And then travel to Canada can be arranged for those who do not have a valid passport. And then travel loans will be arranged if the refugee cannot pay for flights, and when they get to Canada, they will need to contact Collections Canada to arrange for a deferral of payment until the end of their settlement year. And also, in some locations, biometrics data is collected for the security screening process and to verify that the dependents are genetically related. Another important thing is that refugees are advised to make use of IOM's support, especially with frequently changing and cancellations of flights and potential border restrictions. And if everything goes well, they will arrive in Canada. Okay, so that's it for the summary of this module. Just a quick reminder for everyone that the first 4 module quizzes should have been completed yesterday. And then we have the review of the quizzes of modules 1 to 4, excuse me, on Wednesday, October 25th, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just a quick note, you will need to register for that session from the Module 5 tile on the course dashboard to receive the correct link to join on the Teams, because it will be a different link than the one that we have right now. And then also just a reminder that the modules 5 to 8 should be completed by November 19th, and then the review will take place on November 22nd, and then final exam is due 26th of November. And then please be sure to submit your final exam before the closing time for your own time zone. And then reminder, the passing grade is 60%.